And we are live with another edition of White Noise, the show with educator Jay Wamsted in Georgia, Atlanta, which we're going to hear a little bit about today because they have been in the news. Good things happening down in, well, mostly good things happening in Georgia, perhaps. And I'm Chris Stewart. So welcome to the show. Jay, what are we talking about today? What's the thing? This is White Noise. This is my opportunity to have a white friend help me understand white world with a little bit of my feedback. So
I prepare for White Noise, Chris, I keep some notes about some Twitter exchanges and personal conversations, and I have those. They're kind of down the back burner. And then I Google white teacher, I Google schools racism, I do some research like that. But today, I think we have to start by talking about the Secretary of Education and everything going on around that, even though that's not strictly a black or white issue. Being an issue of education, of course, it touches issues of race. So I want to talk about that first, Chris. So I want to bounce that back to you because, I want to hear what you have to say first, and then I'm going to come in under that. So go. Uh-oh, I lost you.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
all right.
Okay. Yeah.
First time ever trying this stuff on the internets. I'm still learning, how it works and everything.
I'm just glad it was you and not me. That makes me feel better. I was like, oh no.
All right. So we are talking about this. You're asking me about the Secretary of Ed specifically, right?
Yes. I want to start with you, and then I'll take it for a sec.
Well, I have just kind of an obvious Chris Stewart way of looking at this things,
Yes.
About this that are just important. So you have a president who won saying, "Black people, I owe you," and one of the major picks that he's going to make is going to feel to me to be very transactional if it goes the direction that it sounds like it's going. Like there are people on that list who are like Randy Weingarten and Lily from the National Education Association. So it's like union people and kind of a war for the soul of the department. Meaning basically, do we have some reformers or do we have union people or do we have a mix between the two?
Right.
And I feel like if he picks the Randy Weingarten, the unions of the world, I think it throws everything else in doubt. I'll make a very strong statement to you actually about this. This will explain everything. If he hands over the Secretary of Education to someone who is anti-choice, anti-charter, education policies that poll very well with black and brown people, I will stop voting for any Democrat for at least a decade. I will never, in the next decade, vote for a single person with the D before their name if he does that. Because number one, he doesn't have to. Number two, it'll show the extent to which he has no respect for us at all. And number three, he ran as a person who said, I want to bring us all together. I want to heal us. We've been so fractured. The rhetoric, we need to tone it down. Well, rhetoric in education has been very divisive. You're either for or against. You're not for everybody. You can't say we should have it all. We should have some kids who are homeschooled, some kids are in charters, some private, whatever, the mix. So when you make a choice like that as Biden, you're saying, I agree with Randy Weingarten's math, which is the only people that matter with children in the United States are the 90% that have kids in schools where her members earn their dues. The other 10%, which actually it's more than that, but the other 10%, you're a minority. You don't matter. And that's what you do. Take your name off of any other minority. That's what you do. I've been reading a lot about in groups and out groups in the last week because of something that I'm writing. And the science between creating in groups and out groups and scapegoat groups and being able to say like, that group doesn't matter will play out if he does that. And I won't vote for another Democrat for a very long time if that were to happen. So there you go. That's what you need to know about the race to me. And
I knew that. And I mean, I don't know, about 10 years, I wouldn't have thought you would have pulled for 10 years, but
at least a decade.
You'll be, I don't even know how old by that point.
That's right. A million.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I don't like Randy Weingarten as Secretary of Ed either. or the other big union name. I can't remember. You said it. What's the other one?
Lilly.
Yeah.
From National Education Foundation,
right?
Or Association.
I don't like either of those either. But I want to return to the appeal of why that person might get appointed. First, though, I do want to ask you, like, who would you appoint if you could wave a magic wand?
Well,
I know you have an answer. Come on.
Well, right now we're running a poll. So Brightbeam has up right now on our Voice to Action website. We have a poll that's going right now that actually you can vote for your people. There's I think maybe 10 candidates, and there's an other category, and it's ranked choice voting, meaning you don't have to vote for one.
The best way to vote. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, right? Yeah. So, and honestly, to tell you the truth, if there was this level of participation in the way that Biden makes these decisions, rather than it being behind closed doors and private and all that stuff, I'd feel better about it. So on that list, some that stick out for sure. So Jeffrey Canada is on that list. Mm-hmm. So he's somebody I would definitely place high on the list. Brenda Casilius is high on that list, and Brenda is the chancellor of Boston Public Schools. Sonia Santelius is on that list. She's in Baltimore. Go ahead.
Is she the one y'all had on 8 Black Hands from Baltimore a couple months ago? Okay.
We had Sonia on a while back.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, I love her. I actually, more than anything else, I love somebody who actually has run a system and has been responsible every day for actual decisions about how systems work. Not some of these other people that are being floated who actually have never had that experience, never been responsible for thousands of kids, in your care, which is why I kind of like superintendents a little bit.
Yeah. I totally agree about superintendents. Obviously, I do have a soft spot for academics and theorists, and I know a lot of people were putting Gloria Ladson-Billings on their wish list, and I love Gloria Ladson-Billings. I've read so much of what she's written, but I'm not. Who knows when the last time she was in a classroom was? I mean, or in a system at all. I mean, she's been a professor forever, right? So you and I had a tiny exchange. You don't even remember. It was maybe a week or two ago where Ankrum posted a list, and maybe this is the same list you're talking about. It was a list, and it was a graphic, and there were some people on it, and I questioned Eva Moskowitz on it.
Oh my God! I'd pick her. Maybe that's who you were talking about. Yeah, well, for sure, I'd pick Eva.
Okay, so I said Eva Moskowitz with a question mark, and you responded something all caps, yes. And I was
probably like heels, yes. That was probably more like heels, yes. It was probably more like that. Yeah.
I'll save that for white noise. So here we are. Yeah. Again, this is not a black-white thing.
Yeah.
So the reason I don't like Eva Moskowitz for this job is she has credentials running a system, but she doesn't have credentials running a public school system. And
what are you talking about?
What?
She does. She runs a charter network.
She runs a charter network. Sure.
Yeah.
I want somebody with I want somebody with experience running a traditional public school network. I want somebody. They've got to be pro charter school. That's what invalidates Weingarten and the other one for me. And I really want to talk about even this language of charter school. As right now, but that's what. Before we do though, that's my problem with Moskowitz though, is that she, as far as I can tell from her resume, has done a lot of great things, and I'm very I'm pro her. I'm pro success. I love saying that.
I'm anti-success.
But her experience in the traditional public schools is real limited, and that makes me a little nervous for somebody at that highest level to have such attenuated view of traditional public school. She's only seen them from the outside, or the last time she was in one, or maybe she's had children in one. I doubt it. That's how I feel.
So when I say a superintendent or somebody who has run a system, I mean, first of all, Success Academy is not like a charter network anywhere else because they are so deeply embedded within the New York public schools. That's just the way that charters run in New York.
Yeah.
So like you are constantly involved with the DOE and constantly involved with the regular traditional public schools in New York. There's no getting away from it. It's not like where I live where you can be a totally set aside system, right? Like you can just run your schools outside of it. No, you're part of that system and that bureaucracy, and you know it pretty well. But when I say superintendents, I mean superintendents, period. Like it could be a small district or a bigger district, you know, southern or northern. Listen, the difference between a school district superintendent in San Antonio and New York and where you are couldn't be more different, and definitely the Twin Cities. Those aren't like the same public school systems. Those aren't. They're not even similar. Like my soup from the Twin Cities versus a soup of New York, they have not run the same type of system at all.
No. And Atlanta actually is a real small. The city system is actually pretty small. There's only like 50,000 children. It's not.
I didn't know that, really.
Yeah, it's a carve out from the county. So Atlanta proper, the actual city districts of Atlanta are not all that expansive. It's the spread of the suburbs and even the short suburbs that makes Atlanta so populous. But even inside the city of Atlanta, there's carve-outs that take away from the students. So the actual Atlanta city schools are relatively small. I mean, 50,000 isn't that big in the scheme of things. No, I totally agree. I mean, and Moskowitz has that going for her in terms of like, I understand being inside the biggest public school system in the world. I mean, in the country, I can't speak to the world. And I know success is like integrated with New York Public in a way that isn't like KIPP down here, right? Like KIPP down here just operates autonomously. And I know that's not the same. So I hear you. I'll give you that. I'll rethink that position.
And I'll also say this about her. You know, the other thing about her is that she's a hard ass. She knows politics. Yeah. I'll say this about New York people, period, is actually, I don't think that they would be like wilting flowers, you know, if they became ed secretary or secretary of housing and interior or whatnot. I mean, he could appoint de Blasio and I would still have that same thing saying that they got going for them is it's a political position. It's not just an education position that you'll be in. So you'll have to know how to do politics, and for sure, even knows how to do politics like real well.
Yes. And that, I mean, that's what she did before success, right? Something with city council or
her and de Blasio were both on the city council together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And they were like this, they were knocking each other out. But of course she would never make it through I shouldn't say she wouldn't make it through the process. She won't make it through the initial process because so much of Biden's team is leftover holdovers from Bernie's education team. So Eva would never even make it on the list. There's just no way she would make it on the list. But if she did, if she had to get through a Republican Senate, she could probably do it.
So let's talk about this. Let's pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I've been buzzing because I was just thinking about all this. And I know that to you, it largely, I mean, it largely comes down to the question of charter schools, right? I think, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but as far as Ed Secretary goes, you're thinking about the 8 million Black children, and your lane is thinking about charter schools, right? So like that's kind of a litmus test for you.
That's one
way or the other. Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely one.
Not trying to throw like I'm not throwing single issue thinker at you. That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
So I have decided today that I think charter schools, we who support charter schools, we have a branding / language problem. Okay. I heard it today when on A Black Handsome last week. I can't remember her name. Y'all were talking to Bernie's press secretary. Was it his former?
So it's former press secretary is Brianna Joy Gray. Okay.
And she said something about blah 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 something charter schools and public schools, and like Ankrum interrupted her to go, charter schools are public schools. And it occurred to me, I've heard that sentence get interrupted into A Black Hands or read it in a tweet thousands of times. And it reminded me of that old it's something I'd read a long time ago about, and I'm gonna pivot to a different controversial issue about abortion. And I'd read some think piece somewhere that said that one of the main victories that the right won in the abortion wars was when they got it named pro-life. Because when they named it pro-life, when that name finally stuck, the left became pro-death, right? Because that's the opposite of pro-life. And so the left chose had to choose. They were stuck with inferior options, right? The right won. They got the high ground in the battle. I don't mean morally. I just mean like literally, like if you're up high fighting, you're in a better position. They had the high ground in the battle because they chose the better name, and the left was stuck with the leftovers. It occurs to me that the charter schools have a problem with that right now, because it's just not working. Like the language.
Wait a second. Let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
Who do they have that problem with? Because every poll after poll after poll after poll shows you that the majority of Americans support charter schools, and they support the chartering idea. And when you break it down by Republican and Democrat, and you can break it down by male and female, rich and poor, the further you get from people, really, the people who have the biggest problem are white, female, college educated, of course, unionized teachers. Even private school teachers poll differently than public school teachers poll on this. So it's kind of like saying Trump has a branding problem with all of people of color. Like, you know what Trump's problem really is he's just not getting anybody other than a select group of white people, right? So who do we have this branding problem with?
To me, you have it because in debates, and I heard it between, again, I forgot, Sonia and Ankrum, when the people that are against charter schools keep having to make you interrupt and say no, charter schools are public schools. The language is on their side in some way.
I'll give you that. In her case, I'll just say this much: she was saying she wasn't against them. She was speaking very much out of ignorance, which is amazing that you're the press secretary for a major presidential campaign, and part of your job is to be able to speak to the environment, jobs, housing, tax policy, these different things. Someone asks you, what is Bernie's position on the environment? You're supposed to be able to say boom, 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 and boom. When it came to education, she was just like, I don't know anything about education. I'm just gonna be honest to you guys. Yeah.
And she said that. I mean,
she said that. She was just like, I don't know anything.
But it's a fair question. Did Bernie have an education plan that went beyond?
He did. It was 100% the union ticket.
Okay. That's not really a plan.
We're going to put a whole bunch of money into it was a plan. He had kind of like the same plan that Biden has now. Some of his plan got carried over, which is things like more money for Title I, more money for desegregation policies, more money to attract teachers of color, more money to the HBCUs, less choice, less, anything that had Betsy DeVos's name on it, we're going to stamp it out. So you might be right.
No. I don't want to be right. I just it reminded me of it the way I constantly have to. I hear it like I think I believe you about the poll data you're saying, but I hear it in the popular parlance is that when people say like, oh, I'm against charter schools, like they're not thinking that charter schools are under the umbrella of public schools, right?
Yeah.
And there's something.
Let me ask you a question about this, though. Well, first of all, let me say this. Ramona said, agreed, but the public often does not know how charters are funded and often buys into the mantra that charters are taking money from the district schools, the school districts.
And yes, and just before you ask your question, let me say yes, Ramona, because I think so in that conversation between, I'm just using it as like metonym for all conversations. When Sonia says blah, 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 charter schools and public schools, and Ankrum has to interrupt, Sonia has set up the same problem that the pro-life people has. She's setting up charter schools as if they're set apart from public schools and thus opposed to public schools and thus taking money from public schools, right? And that narrative is there in the language. And there's something I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah. You believe in the devil, Jay?
I believe in something like a devil, yeah.
So you don't have to answer these if you don't want to answer, but are you a Christian?
I am a Christian.
Okay, so
I don't believe in a pitchfork red horn devil, but I believe in a
But you believe in some force of evil.
I believe in an evil that we can call the devil. Yeah.
Yeah. And what are some of the characteristics of that? Let me just back up. Is lying one of the characteristics of that?
Yeah.
Is sowing division one of the characteristics of that?
Sure.
Is creating anger, malcontent, benevolence. These are all the things as Christians we're taught that those are all fruit. They're the opposite of kind of like the fruit of the spirit, right? Because like the fruit of the spirit is all these things like generosity and blah blah blah, whatever.
Right.
So when the thing, and I'm only bringing this up because it's really interesting to me right now. I'm going in a weird esoteric place with this thing that I'm writing because I'm reading all this science around the outgroups. Like, I haven't for many years like delved back into like the Holocaust. Like, I read as a teenager, I think I read some stuff about kind of like the mentality, the psychology, a lot of the stuff that went along. Why did people go along with these things?
Right.
So when you pit a group of schools against another group of schools, they're not really buildings. There's people in those. Those are kids. Yeah. So you're saying this group of kids and this group of kids are now at odds. Even that as a human math problem starts to feel icky right away the moment you do it. I agree with you that it happens. I agree that the language is set up, but is that person who's falling into that so easily? Like oh yeah, those schools are against our schools, red and blue team, Crips and Bloods. That person who's falling into that, what's the spirit that's driving that in them to not stop them and say, well, God damn it, wait a second now. Those are kids and teachers and people and human beings, and not just the charters. But God forbid the ones who don't go to any public school, not just charters or whatnot. Are we really saying that they really just stopped being parents? I mean, being people, like they're no longer, I'm asking a weird question, but it just feels like an educated person would stop themselves and say, no, I mean, those are people in those schools and maybe we should treat them like, I don't know. There's just something really yucky about the discussion.
Here's why I think the language like matters, and I don't know how to fix it, but it's just what's been bouncing around my head thinking about Ed Secretary the past week or so, is that I think coming out of Davos and kind of I think in the public imagination, there are too many people associate just that label, charter schools, with the idea of universal vouchers, money follows the kid, at blind, checks go wherever at all costs. And I'm vehemently against that idea. I don't think private school parents should all be receiving checks for their kids that they pulled out of the public school networks.
Why? Tell me why.
Why?
Yeah, why? Let me ask the question differently. Should they pay into the kitty if they can't take it out? Should they be taxed for something they can't use?
Yeah, we get taxed for things we don't use all the time.
For personal items, though, we don't. We get taxed for libraries. We don't get taxed for medical beds we're not using.
I mean, right? We get taxed for roads, whether we drive a car or not. I mean,
yeah, but schools aren't roads. Schools is a personal service. They're not like the military. They're not.
Schools are public. Schools are a public good / right.
They are not a public good. They are literally by definition not a public good. Actually, like if you look up the meaning of public good, public schools, libraries are a public good because they're not rivalrous. Public schools, because they're rivalrous, meaning if I take out of the system, it hurts you or you hurts me, which means, let me explain it differently. I could go to any public library. It doesn't matter where I live. It doesn't matter what address I have. Doesn't matter if I buy $1 million house. Doesn't matter what neighborhood I live in.
Sure.
That's a public good. That's a public good.
I don't know. There's libraries you can't go to unless you live in the town where the library is zoned. I mean, like there's zoned libraries. Just like
I could go to any library. I could walk in any library in the United States because I do it all the time. Every time I travel, I go to people's libraries all the time.
You can't check books out of the library that I go to.
Checking books out is a little bit different, but I bet you I could, as a matter of fact, because you don't want to mess with me on this one. I'm kind of a library expert. Well, I can get books out of any library in the United States, but my point is I can't walk into any school in the United States. I can enroll in any school in the United States or whatnot. Because
let's back off libraries for a second.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you asked, why am I opposed to this idea? So let's do a thought experiment, and I'll bounce a question to you. There's a preponderance of private schools here in the Atlanta area.
Okay.
Let's say, thousands and thousands of kids go to private schools inside the city limits. I'm going to say there's 10,000 families that send their kids to private schools. Those 10,000 families, even generously, have a $10,000 property tax liability. That's ridiculously low, but let's just, for round numbers, let's just say 10,000 families, $10,000 property tax liability. That's $100 million. All right. That $100 million, according to the Follow the Money plan, will get instantly taken from Atlanta Public Schools and a couple of surrounding counties and sent to a bunch of private schools. Now you tell me what happens next, because I think that's a disaster.
Is it the same kind of disaster when 150,000 white families leave Detroit, go to the suburbs with their money, and the Detroit public schools collapse? It may be the exact same thing, and you may say, well, that's bad for Detroit that happened, but you don't say, I don't think that they have a right to stand up, take their money out to the suburbs and build new schools out there with their per pupil income. You only say it when it's a private school. That's my point, is like the entire suburban area of many metro cities actually were built by white people taking their money like it was a voucher and putting it in their car and driving out to the suburb and relocating there and taking their money there. So,
but they're still handing their money over to a different system that's zoned according to. They're still playing by the same rules.
It's not playing by the same rules. They literally, when you have 150,000 people drop out of a school district, it's the exact same thing. The only difference that you're making now is, but I still like the person that they're taking the money to, which is a private enclave that they have built for themselves so that they don't have to go to the city schools. That's all suburbs are. Suburbs are straight up like private enclaves that, number one, were financed by the cities. The cities actually paid for the sewer systems of the suburbs and then sent their kids out there and built their schools and built their little enclaves with their covenants that they had. And they created these little civic societies outside of the city now. And we're not calling that private. We only call it private, in modern times, when you have a district that wants a seed from their district, like a wealthy area wants to seed from, so it's the same thing to me. That's all I'm saying is it's the same thing kind of. Okay.
I can see on some surface level, there's analog there, but I think rhetorically it doesn't feel right to me. But let's go back to my question of what happens. So first off, I would say that, and this is why I think so many people are opposed to this idea, is because what happens is Atlanta Public Schools collapses, large parts of it collapse with that much budget lost overnight. And a whole bunch of people that were already doing really well for themselves get $10,000 in their pocket overnight. In what world is that what America needs right now, is this huge infusion from schools that are largely black and brown, by the way, and taking money from them and sending it to a bunch of people who also are, some of them are black and brown, or who are doing really well for themselves. And as a corollary, I would say, according to your logic, anybody that lives inside the city limits that doesn't have children shouldn't pay property taxes into the schools, right? Because that's what you're saying. If you don't use it, you shouldn't have to pay for it.
There's a whole lot in there, Jay. Okay, let's just break a couple things down.
All right.
First of all, there's a primary difference between the way liberals and conservatives think about money. So I'm somewhere in the middle. I always represent myself as a libertarian, so that would actually put me more to the right than probably you are by far. But I have more of a heart and a compassion for Christ that makes me, even as a libertarian, kind of roll back the other direction. So. But there's some primary things that answer questions about the money. Whose money is it? Where does the money come from? Who's supposed to control it? Why? Why do you get to control it? Who said that you should be in charge of this? Those are all questions that when we talk about this money, it's not like magic money. So when we say, oh, we're just going to take $10,000 out of the schools and give it to this rich guy, whatever. Well, that's one way of seeing life, right? That's very much a liberal way of seeing life. It's hard for me to follow that logic because I'm not a liberal, right? I don't think that that money belongs to the school district. I don't think the questions around what happens to the school district if the child who's generating the money with their head count moves to a program that is better suited for them or more fitting for them as an American citizen.
That's different.
You're
talking about per pupil money, and that mixes up with the state and the Fed dollars. I'm talking about purely just property tax money that goes into the general kitty. So that's the money that like.
Well, you're talking about it leaving though in the child's backpack though, right? How does the money leave? When you say the money leaves and goes to this other guy or goes somewhere else, how does that money move? What's the vehicle that it moves in?
I would assume the vehicle is going to have to move in some sort. I mean, the same way like you have a homestead exemption, or some like where I live, we have a homestead exemption. When you get above like 70, you don't pay property taxes anymore, because in theory you like are aged out. So that I would assume would happen to anybody if their children didn't go to the public school. If their children went to private school, it would be really easy to like just divert that money back to them.
Yeah, I think in some ways these are wrong questions for me to answer because, like, in some ways, a question that comes before your question is that the way we should fund schools?
And that's a fair question,
right? Like, shouldn't the state just carry the whole burden, right? Like, why should you be raising funding through property taxes and like, may the best player win type of thing? No, it's a state function. It's in your state constitution, I'm pretty sure. So yeah. I don't know why the state wouldn't just fund the whole thing. And so that to me would even be a primary question. A question before we get to your question would be, number one, how should the money move? Like the property tax thing. Rebecca Sibilia, you've seen her on my show, I think, or we talked about her before, at least with Ed Build. I mean, they've got all the data and just how inequitable it is to fund schools the way that we fund them right now. So
sure.
That's to me where the money starts. But I don't know. I get a little weirded out on the rich guy is going to get the money and the money's. I think every American child should get an allotment for their educational purposes because there is a state and there's an interest for the state to have every child, regardless of where they live, be educated.
Yes.
Right. That would make public education a public good, would be funding every child, not funding them only if they go through building A or building B. That's a regressive system. That is not a generous system. That is a regressive system. That is not a system that treats all kids as real citizens. So every American born, I just gave a speech today. I said there are 360,000 babies born a day. Every one of those is its own story. Every one of those, the story is authored by God. And I think the government should look at every 360,000 of those babies as a future citizen and set aside an allotment for their K-16 education. And then however they choose to make it happen, they make it happen, but not for a building, not for pensions, not for teachers,
So at that point, I mean, we're probably out over our skis in terms of how to talk about it. Because I hear you. I hear you. It's insane the way schools are funded because it's this crazy calculus of property taxes and state dollars and federal dollars and then Title I dollars if that's part of your makeup. And that's a mess. And it would be, if we could undo that knot and remake it, we would, but that's not going to happen. And so the question of just,
you shouldn't say that's not going to happen.
All right.
What are you saying is not going to happen? Like the state, there's not going to be a state that takes over the whole load. I mean, we were on the verge of that in Minnesota at one point.
You'd be closer to that than me in terms of like knowing the players.
I don't think it's, I think it's what Ed Build is pushing for. I definitely think it's what they want to happen. I just think, and to go back to our charter school branding problem, because I'm very pro charter school, but it took me a while to get there. As far as I started my careers in traditional public schools. I've only taught in a traditional public school. I only went to traditional public schools. My children have only gone to traditional public schools. So it took me a long time to understand what a charter was. And I really do think there's a branding language problem, but I do think that part of it is
I have this gut revulsion to the notion of what they used to call vouchers. I don't know if they're still like, if that's still the like one word name for it, but this the follow the money and here, the follow the money, just like if it happened overnight, would be so inequitable. And that really, it bothers me. And I think, and this is a loop back to my original point, back to Sonia and Ankram's conversation, I think it bothers a lot of liberals.
That was Brianna, by the way. Brianna was the one who, Brianna Joy Gray was on with
Brianna,
us.
Okay.
Yeah, Brianna.
I'm so sorry. To loop back to that conversation with Brianna and Ankram, is that I think there's a lot of liberals that are pro-charter school, but they are anti-vouchers and the follow the money, the big picture Betsy DeVos, like send the checks all over the place. And I think if those could get separated in some way, there would be better outcomes for charter schools. And if we could come up with a better name, instead of saying I'm for charter schools or I'm pro-choice, we should take over the word public and just start saying, oh, I'm pro-public. And people would say, I thought you were pro-charter. And then you go, yeah, because charter is public. And you just like, but so the last thing I'm gonna say is this, is
that'd be, in some ways, I just want to say to you, that in some way feels like people saying that Black Lives Matter have a branding problem. That like the people who are fighting for their rights to have access to police officers that police them like they're citizens, like they're real people, that if only they would say it to us the right way, we would be for something that's equitable, that we should already be for anyways. And that that feels hard. That's like super hard to like go there with people, be like, you know what?
No,
why should we have to argue for our right to like just educate our kids? So
that's racist, like crazy talk, right? No, you're right about that. Like Black Lives Matter doesn't have a branding problem. The people that don't like it have a soul problem.
See, that's how I feel about charter schools.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to tell you, all right. Well, I mean, if we got nowhere to go if we're not quite sure about this voucher thing. I will say this, and this is another thing of being a Southern boy, is the terrible, inequitable, racist history of private schools here in the South. So many of them that popped up post-Brown and that were founded post-Brown or that blew up post-Brown and were made as segregation academies just so that white people could get their kids out of those schools before the Black children were allowed to go into them. The thought that those schools are all going to get a big infusion of cash, it makes my blood boil. Like I would burn some of those schools to the ground if I could, Chris.
So we should keep the money in the school districts that never had any racial problems whatsoever in the South.
That's you're jiu-jitsu in my comment.
Which is on purpose, because the people who make that comment, first of all, let's stop investing in anything that has origins or roots or an experience in America's racist history. Sure. Then we would get rid of teachers' unions because they started in racism and they actually persisted in racism for years. We would get rid of school boards because everything that happened bad to us before and under Brown and even after Brown happened beneath mostly white school boards and school superintendents and school districts, as a matter of fact. So when people get very selective about, well, school choice is rooted in racism, or charter schools have an analog to racism, or the segregation academies, people forget who started the segregation academies. School boards did. Democratically elected school boards are the ones who created white havens for the kids that they didn't want to make integrate. So that happened underneath the same system that we're putting kids in right now. That happened in traditional public school systems underneath school boards and superintendents. And that's where our kids are trapped right now. So this is the part where it gets hard for me, like with unions.
But Chris, how does taking $100 million from those children and handing it over to the bad guys like make it better? Except that
first of all, number one, it's not the bad guys. Number two, there's some parent agency. We don't take something from. This is my point about how does the money move? Is there something between point A and point B called a parent? So between point A and point B, I would probably be against just picking money up and dropping it somewhere else without something in between those two things. That's why I have to ask the question, what's the vehicle? How does the money get from here, to me, is the thing that's going to have me answer this question. There's one way you might say the vehicle would move the money where I'd agree with you. I'd be like, I am not for that. I'm not just for picking it up and putting it right in the pockets of racists, that's for sure. So you and I would agree on that.
They're going to pick it up and they're going to hand it. They're either going to hand it back to people.
What if they hand it to a parent? What if they hand it to a parent, and a parent makes the decision where it goes from there?
I'd be fine with that, Chris, except that they're again the stark inequity of handing it to all the parents, the stark inequity of handing it to all the people who are already paying the bill for their private school. So they just get an extra $10,000, $12,000 sitting in their pocket. These are people that are already doing insanely well for themselves. To just get a little bonus bugs me. But two is I think there's an in between that you might think is happening, and I don't think will happen. Is let's say that kid in the traditional public school all of a sudden with his $10,000 voucher like wants to go to the private school. Are you envisioning like them opening up space and that kid going to that school? Like,
I'm envisioning the same thing that happens right now, is that when you give somebody a Section 8 voucher, it doesn't mean that they're going to get accepted in every apartment building or every house. What it does mean is they don't have to live in the hood. They don't have to be in projects. The projects, the schools that kids are trapped in very much now, where we're afraid to let them get out of, are very much like the equivalent of a housing project. And when you get Section 8, you get to get out of the housing project and go into the market. And people will say, but not every landlord's going to accept your voucher. Yeah, but let's think realistically. I was in a housing project and you gave me a Section 8 voucher across the country, and there were some people that discriminated against me for getting some of the places I want. I still ended up in a better place than being in the housing projects. And there are people now who want to cut Section 8, that literally want to cut Section 8. And oh, by the way, food stamps used to be way more restrictive too, where you could use those. And there's people who want to go back to the way they used to be with that also. Like, you shouldn't be able to just go into the store, any store of your choice, with food stamps and buy steaks and lobsters, is what people say that they're buying, and they're not really going in the stores and buying steaks and lobsters. I've driven families, to places. They definitely not going to Whole Foods all the time, because who would if you've got limited money? But I don't know.
But not everyone. So the problem with that analogy is not everybody gets a Section 8 voucher. There's a long list and a waiting time.
Yeah, and there should be.
But there is, because there's not enough. There's not enough space to put those people. Just like if you handed a voucher.
Well, I don't think it's space though. I think there's not enough
political
money.
Will.
No, there's not enough money in the system.
Okay.
Like we put more money. If we wanted to get rid of Section 8 waiting lists, we could put some money into housing, but we don't.
Yeah, sure.
We don't care.
I was going to say I would chalk that up to political will.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is, I'm just talking about Atlanta. Take the 50,000 kids and give them all a $10,000 voucher. That's every kid. Where are they going to go? There's not space for them to go find some better school. And
there shouldn't be a problem then. There shouldn't be a problem then, right? Then they'll just use it in their regular traditional system. In the 1970s, they did these programs where they gave parent choice. So they gave parents choices. You know what happened? The regular district systems created more options. That's what happened in the 70s when they did these trials. They did trials across, the federal government did trials, school choice trials across the country. Not across the country, but in like 5 to 8 cities. And one of the things that came out of that was things that we now believe were just always part of the public school system that weren't, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's where magnet schools came from, right?
Magnet and open schools, project-based schools,
you're forgetting
all that.
You've imploded the local public school system because you took their budget and handed it to the private schools.
I mean, yeah, so I don't know there's a way for us to get around that one, because there's a primary difference between the way liberals and Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and libertarians and the Libertarian Party members are going to think about that same pot of money. But I can't prioritize the feelings and the thoughts of what happens to the system over the feelings and the thoughts of what happens to the families and the kids, and creating powerlessness over their own resources in any people is a colonial tactic that has happened everywhere. Indigenous peoples who have overthrown colonial people everywhere have actually taken the means of production back into their hands, and they've been fought tooth and nail by the state, by the systems that have been put in place, who will say, no, we'll hold this for you. It is your money, and it is allotted for you and for your kid and for your opportunity, but we got you. We're going to hold it, and we're going to tell you where it can be used and how it can be used. And the more you do that, I honestly think that becomes the difference that political people have with each other about money, taxes, systems, like how it all works. And I do think that liberals like really, really fall on the side of the state, the system, the schools. So when they talk in a very system-centric way. Well, what's going to happen to the system? What's going to happen to the teachers? What's going to happen to the pensions? What's going to happen to the buildings? What's going to happen to the air conditioners? And
I don't care.
all that stuff. All that.
I don't care about none of that, though. I'm thinking about the
very system-centric way of thinking, though.
Yeah. No, and I can see myself in that, because when I think about the system, I'm thinking about the 50,000 kids, and when you shrink their budget by whatever percent, and it gets shrunk by, is that.
But they don't have those kids anymore either, though, right? Or are you talking about the kids who were never there?
I'm talking about the kids that were never there.
You're talking about the kids that were never there.
I'm talking about my like Orwellian nightmare scenario where Betsy DeVos got vouchers through, and somebody signed a piece of paper, and overnight they tallied up all the kids that lived inside Atlanta Public School District but didn't go to Atlanta Public Schools. They all go to the private schools, and they all got $10,000 each just shipped across district lines and got sent to the private schools. And
well, let me ask you a different question then. Let me give you a scenario that may or may not actually exist. Say, for instance, there was a family that had a student. They were well off. They were doing better than the majority of people, but they had a student in their household that, because of some medically fragile situations and some special needs, that was a very expensive student to educate and had been abused in the school system. And in the school system, the public school system, they do this all across the country. They pay private providers for the students that they don't want to educate anyways. They do that often, as a matter of fact. It's not even called a voucher. They just do it. They basically say, your IEP is going to be too much for us. We don't have the services for you. If you can find a private service to do it, we'll pay for it. And that happens already. But in some states, there's a voucher for that. And it's not really a means tested. Doesn't mean if you're doing well, you don't get it. It just means that if you have that particular condition that is covered by the voucher, you get to use it. So you have lots of special ed students that are in these very specific schools, these schools that, have made their lives and their livelihood on serving those students. But it's still not very cheap. So you're doing that, and you're spending money, and you're still being taxed for the regular school system, because you're not really getting a full voucher from the money that you would have been spending if you kept your kid in a public school that actually really couldn't handle them or suit them. Is that a situation where you have some sympathy for the parent that they're being double taxed? Like they really are still having to pay some money on the private side, and they're still being taxed for the public side, even though they're not getting any service or benefit out of it?
I have tremendous sympathy for that parent, because what you're describing on the edges is the same problem that we have in healthcare. It's that a small minority of difficult to treat or difficult to educate students cause most of the expenditures, right? And so that's what makes systems like a good thing, because there's things in place to help those students, treat those people, but also it makes it just so hard to navigate, and so it doesn't work. The systems, in one sense, on one hand, I'm the systems. There's only a system could help a child or help a patient in a case like that, but on the other hand, it's but they don't, right? So I don't know what the solution is. So yeah, I have tremendous sympathy for that.
But we made some common ground. There's some common ground on that one.
We've got lots of common ground. I think you're going to go home. You are home. I think you're going to walk out of this room and you're going to think about what I'm talking about maybe we chill a little with the vouchers and we change our language a little bit.
As much as I am for charters, I am for 100% of money that's allotted for your child for state education going to the parent to determine how that money is spent. Like that in my perfect world, that's the way this money flows. So when I ask you questions of like, how does the money get to where it's supposed to be? What's the vehicle? Whose money is it anyways? Who does the money belong to? I actually don't think if we started fresh today, we would design the system the way that we design it right now. I think we would have what I am starting to call, because some of my liberal friends might even, follow me, if I rebrand it this way. This is perfect for this discussion. You just said it's a branding problem. If we just called it single payer education, then we don't have any problem now, right? Because we know what single payer education is, right? So there you go.
It's not single payer education because you're depending in your scenario on a market economy building all these schools all over the place to like handle the needs and desires of these vouchers, which isn't going to happen for the same reason the healthcare system
it did happen in the healthcare system.
It failed. And the healthcare fails because the market fails healthcare. The market fails education.
Well, okay, I don't want to fall down too far down that rabbit hole, but I mean,
I got another one. Back up.
Come up. Yeah.
Back up. Why, if education isn't a public good or a public right, why am I entitled?
It's not a public right.
Oh, okay.
It's not a public good. Public good is an economic term. It's a term of art.
Okay.
So when education people use it improperly, I find it deeply concerning. So like Randy Weingarten and others travel the country saying education is a public good, education is a public good. And it, like any economist will tell you and knows that it's a term of art. So they shouldn't probably be telling the public that, because actually, literally, by definition, it's not a public good, which is the reason we have all the problems we have with it. It is not distributed equally to everyone. Education is distributed on a very unequal basis in terms of teacher salaries and per pupil allotments and resources and all that stuff, even books and whatever. None of it is distributed on an equal basis. Not even the quality of inputs is equal anywhere. So to call it a public good would mean that it was more like the national parks. We can all go to Yellowstone, and we can all get equal use out of Yellowstone. Me going to Yellowstone isn't going to stop you from getting the same thing out of Yellowstone that I want.
Yeah, but don't you think Randy Weingarten believes that if she just had her little magic wand and lever pulling, like she could make education a public good so that everybody, like, even though they were in their own schools, they were all getting the same education and everybody had access to the same tools and tricks, right? I mean, she believes that. She believes
I don't know what she believes. I know she shouldn't say that if it's literally not true.
Okay.
Yeah. If it's inaccurate, I think actually this is one of the things educators have to be careful, because if you agree with that and you get into that, you're ruining your credentials as an educator, because your purpose as an educator is to impart knowledge on people and to help people discover their own knowledge. And that should be accurate, shouldn't it? Like if she doesn't know the definition of what a public good is and she's teaching the public something that isn't true, doesn't that put her teaching credentials a little bit in question?
Yeah, I've got no...
I mean, it's a little weird to me. She knows it's not true, by the way. She's an attorney, so she knows it's not true.
I don't know. Some of these politicians, I think Trump thinks he won, like, for real.
He did win.
I have a question for you. Why, as a libertarian, so you've taken a lot of umbrage with me, like, objecting to taking this money and handing it to person X and where's the money coming from? Why, as a libertarian, though, are you so insistent that we should have some amount of money that each child is due throughout the lifetime of their K-12 education, and that we should hand it to their parents? Why do they get that?
I think it's part of the constitutional premise of the general welfare, right? Like I can make a case that, like, without children, you don't have a country. So, like, when the Constitution calls for us to think about the general welfare, and this is an argument that I would have with people on the right? Like, you say you're about the Constitution, you say you're strictly about the Constitution, and that's the premise of your being a libertarian. Great, because there's several things in there that it doesn't say that the government should do everything. It's true. There's a lot that it doesn't say the government should do. It does say it should promote the general welfare, though. And I can't think of anything more vital to the country. And this goes all the way back to the late 1700s, early 1800s when they had these debates, they all basically came around to thinking that preparing the citizenry to actually lead and to be a country that could be a country and wouldn't get taken over by other nations required education.
Okay.
Right?
So who do you want to take that money from? Like, does that make sense? Like right now we do it with a lot of property taxes and some primarily property taxes. Who do you want to take that money from?
So I don't know what you mean. You mean in taxes? Like who should be taxed for it?
Yeah, I mean, so like if everybody,
it should fit in a normal tax scheme.
There's going to be givers and takers, right? There's going to be people who like put a lot more money into the system than their kids get out, and there's going to be people that don't put much money in at all, and their kids get out. And to me, like, don't get me wrong, like I think that is fair, because I believe in the like just what you said, that without an investment in our children, we're literally like just dancing on the grave of America. So yes, I'm all for that. My question though is I feel like I'm pretty consistent in not wanting to pull money from here just to hand it to these people that don't actually need it.
Yeah.
I can't quite figure out like whatever the money is, like let's say, what is it, like $34,000 a year times 12, like $400,000. Let's just say like per kid for their K-12. Like let's just say we handed that as a not as a blank check literally, but as a like system of vouchers to a parent upon their child in kindergarten. Like where does that money come from in terms of givers and takers and taxers, you know?
So actually, number one, I honestly, and this is just me talking not as an expert, because I've listened to a lot of what Rebecca would do, I think, in a lot of these situations. But in Minnesota, we were on the verge at some point of the state taking on the full burden. So it not being about property taxes and like it not being about city A has more, taxable property than city B. So that means your schools are going to follow that. No, across the board, Minnesotans are going to get the same allotment across the board, everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's because the state is taxing everybody. Yeah, the state is taxing everybody. So, you're paying the same amount for a military person and a library seat and blah, blah, blah. We're all paying the same amount for that because it's a state obligation. Libraries are not a great example because, counties and others run that too. But I'm just saying we're all getting an equal allotment. We're all being taxed for the general things like that. So for me, that would be my way of looking at it. Not being a tax expert, and I think there's a state interest in doing that.
Oh, I agree.
Just saying, like today, how many babies were born? 1,000 babies are born. Okay, this is how much money we're going to set aside per each one of those 1,000 babies for a K-16 education. Boom, done. Right.
Well, yeah, and any city planner would tell you that an educated population is the best thing you can have for a city.
It's a better one.
I mean,
yeah, and I actually think more people would support it and buy in if it was a universal benefit, not if it was these group of people get this and these get nothing, right? Like in some states, for instance, I've brought Arizona up a lot about charter schools. Everybody goes to charter schools in Arizona. White people, black people, rich people, poor people, middle-class people, whatnot. And because of that, it's much harder to attack charter schools in Arizona in anywhere, because almost any room that you go in, including teachers themselves. So any room you go, we should shut down these charter schools. You're going to have 10 people and they're going to be like, wait, what? I didn't know that it was that type of party, because they're not considered to be like the school for the poor kids of color,
Right.
And it's the same thing with this, I think.
All right, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to commit to this.
Yeah.
Because when we never even got to, I had all these.
Let's talk about third parties. What were you going to ask me about third parties?
No, we're not even getting into it. I'm going to save it all for next time. It's a whole conversation.
All right. It's a whole ass conversation.
It's a whole ass hour. Like I'm not jamming it in this last minute. But I'm going to go out of here. This is what I'm going to do. Because I am, as you know, I'm a teacher, right? And I'm a teacher in like one specific spot, right, Atlanta. So I know a whole lot about this. I know, my national global thinking is kind of on a theory level, not nuts and bolts. So I'm gonna go out of here, and I'm gonna reimagine what if a state could implement the Minnesota plan, all right? And then I'm gonna really think through how I feel about vouchers. All right. And then we'll talk about that a little bit next time too. All right. I can't process all right this second, but
don't process it now. Let me know what you come up with. I like my baby plan. My baby plan, I think, is the right one. So
no, I mean, right. So, and again, we're not tax people. We don't need to come up with every nook and cranny of how to fund it. First off, nobody asked us either, so it doesn't matter.
This is true.
If Georgia did it, so this is what I'm going to think about. If Georgia did the Minnesota plan, if we got it through, then how would I feel about vouchers? And that's my closing thought. I'm gonna hit you up next time.
Well, this is what I'll say. I don't know that we should make it about vouchers, because that's such a loaded term now, and it's so kind of it's lost its ability for people to discuss it rationally, because it's a politically loaded word by itself now.
That's what I was saying.
It's been made politically loaded, not because it's a bad idea and not because of any other reason, but because that's what politics can do. And the politics of kind of like parochial education, and by parochial, I don't mean like parochial schools. I mean like parochial behavior of the mainline system, the incessant kind of like just crazy, criminally insane way in which the system thinks about the system all day long. That's all the system thinks about. So they can't answer child-centered questions. They can only answer system-centered questions because any other question that they answer will be, but what does that mean for us?
Right.
What does it mean for us?
And I can't remember who said it, but like the quote about the number one function of the bureaucracy is to maintain the bureaucracy, right?
100%. Yes. And they're so good at it. Having been a school board member in one of the kindest and gentlest types of districts that had savage inequalities, it was like crazy that they couldn't see the savage inequalities,
But everyone's so nice up there in Minnesota.
They're super nice, and they'll nice your ass to death. Like nice will kill you. Nice will put you in a grave, right? In some point, or a jail cell.
A freaky pale skin. I don't know.
But what I would like to see people do is stop thinking from a position as a thought exercise, because I understand realities, but when you think solely from a position of scarcity, almost everything that follows is bad thinking in my mind.
Okay.
So scarcity actually makes human beings do bad things and think bad things. And it also normalizes bad things and bad thinking. If you stay in a state of scarcity, and it's weird to be in one of the fattest countries in the world and thinking constantly out of a state of scarcity. Like scarcity politics in one of the wealthiest, most obese countries in the world is weird to me, right? Like it's just, we don't have enough. Really? Really? There's some people in the world going, you don't? Really? You don't have enough for this? There are people who believe we could have Medicare for all, as expensive as that is, and free college, as expensive as that is. But they can't imagine that we can afford to have voucher schools, charter schools, private schools, anything. It's so weird how we could afford everything in the liberal imagination, except for things that have people get educated outside of the system that liberals control, right? In the liberal imagination, we could afford everything. And no, let me just not say the liberal imagination, because in the conservative imagination, we can't afford everything. We can afford as many bombs and tanks as anybody wants to sell us.
Sure.
And $500 hammers to the Pentagon, right? So everybody who preaches scarcity also practices luxury in some other area.
Yeah.
Like we could be a warfare state. We could have wars every other day if we wanted to, but we can't afford to get every kid an education or health care.
Yeah, and I will say you did, like, that pins me, because if you told me money was no object, I got no moral problem with vouchers. I don't care. I just, to me, it's a practicality issue. But you're right. I mean, but being practical, sometimes is just like operating out of scarcity. That's a good point.
Well, the final thing where I was going with that a little bit was like Finland. People like to bring up Finland for all the wrong reasons, and I'm going to bring them up for my reasons, for my own purposes. So in Finland, you get a box from the government on the day that your baby's born. And in that box are everything that you need for like the first 6 months, or I think it's the first 3 months or 6 months of the baby's life. Mm-hmm. With a letter from the government saying, thank you Thank you for having a baby. Like, thank you for continuing the Finns. Like this makes us strong. Here is a box with all the stuff in it that you need for a healthy baby for this period of time. It's such a different way of looking at life than we look at it. In America could easily send everybody a box within it with congratulations. Thank you for making more Americans. Here's everything you need for the first 6 months, but here's also your certificate for K-12 education and for college.
Yeah.
Right. So K-16, that's something we could totally make happen, totally afford to do. Everybody listening to this would fight me to the death to say, no, it's not. It's not realistic or practical. It could be practical if we wanted it to be. Like if we wanted that to happen, we could make that happen.
And to put a pin, to just put some English on that, is that the people that are most opposed to it are people who the system works for. And the system is not working for the vast majority of children, millions and millions and millions of children.
That's right. Well, it's been another. Like, well, I did too, but it's like we over aspire. I think each time we're going to talk about these several things when this one is so kind of like deeply, I think, like ingrained. We'll see where Biden goes with his education.
Down on my notes, I still have the Kamala Harris VP debate. We never got to that, and that's on my list too. So
what was the debate about with her? She's already VP.
No. The debate, like back in October.
Oh, when she actually did the debate with what's his name, with Pence.
Yeah, we never get to all my points, so we're gonna have to do like a 4-hour show once.
I do think, I know we got to run, but you should give me like like your quick and dirty on, since you're in Georgia, like what you think is happening or gonna happen.
So I'm really
is Austin guy. Is he is Austin? What's his name? Austin something.
I am crazy impressed with our Secretary of State because he keeps standing up to the bad guys. And he's just looks like this old Republican guy, and it's like he finally, like one of them finally snapped and is just doing the right thing. And it's kind of happening around the country too. You read little stories about this Republican mayor or that Republican official. But anyway, our Secretary of State is standing up to Trump and our governor, who's terrible, and Lindsey Graham and all this. So I'm pleased with that and how the recount's gone. I don't know. I love Warnock. I'm worried they're going to get him on just inexperience. I mean, like I'm worried that it's going to come down to that. And
weren't they pinning something on him? Some corruption of some sort?
I don't know. What I kept seeing today was that he said something in a sermon several years ago that it was all over Twitter today.
I tweeted out something just a day or so ago about how come every time people talk about cancel culture, they only talk about left-wing examples.
Yeah.
And the reason that I brought that up was I had seen something flash by about Reverend Wright. And there's all this like cancel culture, blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of like, do you remember Obama had to give a whole ass speech because his pastor said, God damn America in a sermon, like in a church or whatnot.
His pastor from like the past too. It wasn't even, was it his current pastor? It's not.
I think he had been there for a long time though. I think he had him for like a decade.
He had to cancel his own pastor on national TV. Yeah,
cancel his pastor and then go give a speech. Like it was like writing on the board. I will not have a pastor that only I agree with. On the board. And now they're or Colin Kaepernick. Now you're telling me that it could happen with this guy. He said something in a sermon. Cancel him. I don't know, man. Listen, I probably watch too much cable news because they're making it feel like really optimistic about Georgia.
They don't know as many Georgians as me. I don't know.
I mean, if you watch 100 hours of it, you'd be like, this is almost in the bag, man.
But Chris, 2 weeks ago, when all I did was just kept refreshing and watching Georgia, and that vote count got closer and closer. And I stayed up till like 2 a.m. I had to teach middle school the next day. And I just kept waiting for them to flip it. And finally, I went to bed and I woke up at 5 and they'd flipped it and I missed it, because it happened at 4 a.m. or something. And it was just it was just this joyous time. I mean, that people at school, people on Twitter, people in the email, people in the Facebook, everywhere. I mean, my people, not like some people were very mad. So maybe I never thought that would happen again. I never thought it would happen again, and it did.
Let's keep watching. Next time around, we might know more. So
we'll definitely know something.
Yeah, we'll know something more. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you giving me these evenings every 2 weeks or so our folks can hear me get more educated from the white side things. I feel like I like suck up a lot of the space as always, but it's always nice to have friendly fire and amendment. Some of the people that and I know on Twitter actually have annoyed me in the last 3 days of being so culturally insulated from the white side of things that they don't even know what they're tweeting and how offensive some of the stuff is. So it's nice to have more of an open conversation like this.